Hello, I'm Lisa Burkhardt Worley, and welcome to Pop Talk, the show where you never know what topics might pop up. Well, today we're going to tackle a very controversial subject as we talk to a woman who was a transgender, but now she says she's transformed. Dr. Lynnette Simm is going to handle the introduction, but before we do that, we want to welcome our team member, Rosemary Legrand.
Hello, everyone.
Well, Dr. Lynnette, would you handle that introduction?
Absolutely. Well, according to the Human Rights Coalition, there's about 2 million people currently identifying as transgender in the United States alone. Its term is for people whose gender identity is different from the sex that they were born with. And today we have Laura Perry here who's going to be speaking to us. She's the author of the book, Transgender to Transformed. And she wrote about her life as she spent 9 years as a transgendered male named Jake. So in this amazing book, she tells her story, but she's also featured in his image. These two groundbreaking pieces of literature and film is going to really show and bring light to the issue of transgender in America. So welcome to Pop Talk, Laura. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, this transformation obviously didn't happen overnight. We don't write a book in overnight. We don't create life in overnight. So can you tell us how your transformation from Laura, the young girl, became Jake, the man, and how that may have stemmed from your mom's desire, maybe that you weren't a girl?
Yeah, it started with a lot of lies that I believed from the enemy. And I look back, and there was a period of time where I kind of blamed my mom. But as I've worked through these things, I've realized that it wasn't her fault. She was doing the best she could. She was killing herself trying to do everything for me. But I think in her own brokenness, she didn't really have that deep relationship with the Lord. Mm-hmm. She said she used to feel like she was on this performance treadmill for God. I was trying to do the right things but kind of in the energy of her own flesh and not really spending that time with the Lord. So a lot of times she was so stressed out, she was burned out and just overwhelmed with life. And so a lot of times it was like, go away, get off of me, leave me alone, just go to your room. But she had a very different relationship with my brother, who was very quiet and obedient, and I was not. And so, I had a lot of energy and really tried her patience, I think. But I was jealous looking at that relationship with my brother. And so I really began to wear his clothes and play with his toys, began spending all my time with him. I wanted to be just like my brother. And I was told I was just like my dad. I act like him. I look just like him. We're two peas in a pod. And so very early in life, I began to believe that I should have been a boy. And as I began to fantasize about those things, and really I used to write stories about being a boy, and then I was molested at 8 years old. And that really began to change me, and I began hiding this dark secret, and I was so awkward, and I didn't know how to fit in with girls, and I began to believe that I wasn't like the other girls, and it just began to reinforce this. Mm-hmm. And then those kind of things continued throughout childhood. By the time I was 14, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome. So then I was told I was likely never going to get pregnant. And I began to get really angry with God. I was like, why did you make me a girl and then make this body that doesn't function right? And I'm not even going to be able to have my own children. And so there began to be a lot of anger. I began to really turn away from the Lord. And just really, I wanted to be the opposite of a Christian. I told God I would never serve him again. And as I began to really run away from the Lord, I began to get in more and more sexual sin. I was trying so hard to fulfill myself through men, through sex, through pornography, and all kinds of other things. And I didn't realize that the Bible actually talks about in Romans 1 how when we suppress the truth that we know about God, we're given over to desires. First of all, just fleshly desires and unnatural desires, and there's a progression there as we turn away from the Lord. And eventually that began to, I developed this fantasy of what if I really had been a man? I knew how to treat a woman. I'd been dumped and rejected so much.
I want to ask you a question. Let's jump in here. What all did you go through, though? I mean, I know that you went through some processes to become a male, didn't you? So what all did you do?
And once I had really embraced that, I began to do everything that they said you're supposed to do. I began to take hormones. I had all the legal changes. In 2009, I had a double mastectomy. And eventually I had a hysterectomy and I had the ovaries removed. And so as I was progressing along this way, I eventually was legally male as well. And I kept thinking, it's like, at some point this is going to be real. I kind of realized in the beginning it was very fake. But eventually it was like, at what point does this become real? I realized that I'm still not a man. And I began to be more and more disillusioned, and I thought, in one sense I'm really happy because I thought at the time, because I'm not experiencing the pain of being a woman, but it really wasn't real. And I knew I was living a lie.
But even though you look like a man on the outside, I'm sorry, I was just taken back by what you're saying, and yet you feel like a woman on the inside. How did God start working on you in the years that you were Jake?
Yeah, that was your name, Jake.
Yes,
right?
it was at the time. And my parents had been praying, and I look back, and God was answering their prayers the whole time. And there were ways that God was revealing himself to me through dreams. He would, people would come into my life just randomly, sometimes gospel tracks left on my car, things I would hear on the radio. He spoke to me all the time over the radio. Just little things. Sometimes it didn't even have to do with, in fact, most of the time it wasn't so much about my sin. God began to reveal himself to me. And I think over the years, that was the biggest thing. But I had all kinds of dreams about how, like I had never transitioned, or I would wake up with long hair, or I would show up at work and not have pants, or, those kind of dreams. And just be reminded constantly of the truth.
Wow. And then one day your mom asked you to create a website for her Bible study, and you did it even though you weren't connected to God at the time, but God worked miraculously in you while you were putting the website together. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and she had tried so hard to fix me all her life. For the first time in her life, she'd really surrendered me into the Lord's hand. She just needed the website. So it's not like she came up with this plan, but God used it. And it reminds me, one of my life verses is Psalm 107:20 that says, he sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destructions. And so God just began to really show me who he was. He began to reveal that he was trustworthy, that he was faithful, things I'd never heard about God before. I'd always seen God as so condemning. I had never understood his mercy and his grace and how he wanted me to receive his forgiveness. And so that's what God began to really reveal over that time.
And God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? He
Yes.
worked through a website. And he also began to work on this relationship with your mom. You thought your mom really preferred boys, and so you decided to be a boy. You were envious of your brother. But talk about what he was doing in that relationship with your mom.
Yeah, I went from almost never calling her, because I'd really kind of cut her off for the most part, to calling her almost every single day because I was fascinated with what she was learning about God. I'd never heard these things. And so I began to call and ask her questions all the time. And as we did, I began to see not only a change in me, because my heart was softening toward God, but in her as well. And I finally said, Mom, what's happened to you? You're not the mother I grew up with. And she told me how she had really been changed by the Holy Spirit, how she'd surrendered to him. And it was no longer her trying to do it all for him, but it was him doing the work in her through her surrender to him. And that really began to change my perspective. And I know that she had a peace that I had never had. And so I began to really desire to have that relationship with God.
Now, as a victim of being molested as well, I understand that can cause all types of confusion and questioning and wrestling with God. So during this time, can you talk to us about how he was able to speak to you in changing your perspective of who you were in him?
Yeah, I really had given my heart at that point. When I saw the change in my mom, I'd really given my heart to Jesus, and I was so sincere, and I was just radically on fire in a way. But I wanted him to have everything but this part of me, and I was still bearing all that pain. Every time I thought about being a woman, it was more painful than I could even describe. So it's like I just wanted to reinvent my life again. This is another way of escape. But God began to slowly draw me little by little. He began to convict me. I knew I was living in sin. And then finally one night, I was really desperate for the Lord, and I threw myself on the floor and I said, God, I want everything you have for me. What do you want from me? I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And he asked me a question. He said, if you stood before me tonight, what name would I call? And I said, oh, Lord, that is not fair. First of all, I've repented of this. I said I was sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it now. I've had these surgeries. I had facial hair at the time. My voice was much lower. I had a partner. I had a job where I was only known as male. I was like, I don't have any way to fix this. So I'm just going to live my life as a man. But he reminded me of John chapter 1, where it says Jesus Christ himself is the creator. He said, you can't claim to love me and yet reject my creation. And I thought I was being condemned because I was not going to go back to being female. That was just not an option. I was going to bury all of that pain and just move on. But in the most loving voice I've ever heard in all my life, he whispered to me and he said, let me tell you who you are. And that's what began to free me over time. It wasn't immediate in that moment. But over time, God began to draw me out of that lifestyle, and he began to heal me. And eventually, he literally just asked me to walk away from it all. And as I began to follow him and I left it all behind, he began to peel away the layers of the onion little by little. And I began to forgive those that hurt me. I began to forgive my mom. I began to let go of all that bitterness and all that pain. And over several years, it was like the desire to be masculine just faded away, and my real identity began to come through. And I realized it wasn't something external that I needed. I didn't need to be given femininity. My femininity was buried under all this pain. What God needed was to peel away all the pain that had been protecting it for so long, all those walls that I had built. And as that began to crumble away, I realized that my true identity was just being revealed.
So that was the way, that was the step that you went through to reclaim or to recreate, who God had created you to be. Could you elaborate on that a little more? Because I'm sure there may be somebody out there listening to that may be going through the same thing that you went through.
And you got plenty of time.
Yeah, okay. And you have plenty of time.
Yeah, he, it was a long process, and there was a lot of things he used. One, when I first came out of the lifestyle, I moved home with mom and dad, which was the last thing on earth I wanted to do at 33 years old. But I knew that's what God was asking of me. And I showed up at my mom's Bible study. These women had been praying for me for years, and they were so excited, and they embraced me and hugged me, and they surrounded me with so much love. And they had raised over $1,600 to buy me a new wardrobe and to pay some bills and things. And they just loved on me. And that was shocking in a way, but it was also a little bit healing. And then eventually God had me in a women's discipleship group. And I remember feeling like, okay, here I was this trans person, and then here were all these girls that I was in a group with. But one day I looked around the room, I was like, they don't see me as any different from them. That was radical to me. I was like, I'm one of the girls. I had never felt like one of the girls in my whole life. And then eventually I worked for the church, and all of the ministers had a female assistant, so I was just like one of these female assistants, and we did everything together. And we would go to lunch together, we'd work on projects together, and so I really began to identify with the girls. And then as I began to wear female clothes again, and each little step where I was obedient, there were some things that were so hard, like wearing a bra with the prosthetic breast. That was one of the hardest steps that I had to go through after I went through so much to have my chest surgery in the first place. And it was so painful to embrace that again and to feel that feminine part of the body again. But as I did, God brought a lot of healing. It was incredibly painful, and actually it took me a year from the time I bought it to the first time I actually wore it, because it was so painful. But as I was obedient to the Lord and as I trusted him with my identity, he just began to heal it little by little. So the biggest encouragement I can give to anyone that's struggling is I didn't figure all this out. I didn't figure out every step that I was going to do. God led me little by little. The more I trusted him, the more that he did the work in me.
And you love being a woman. You are engaged to a man, and you're getting married soon, in May, and you're doing a lot of wedding planning. Can you just talk about what you realized about being a female, some of the good stuff that you realized, and just all the fun? Talk about your meeting, with this gentleman who we've seen the picture of, and pretty nice looking. Yes.
Yeah, it was amazing. I I really believed that God had a husband for me, but it was still hard after all the rejection I had faced for so many years. It was hard for me to believe. But I asked God, I said, I want you to arrange my marriage. I want whoever you want for me. And we ended up, a friend of mine introduced me to him. They had known each other for a couple of years. I had just met this friend a few months ago, or a few months prior to that. But I cannot even begin to describe this amazing godly man who not only is just a good man, but God has been teaching me about his love through this man and teaching me the good design of male and female. So both of us have a passion, and I've been teaching a little bit on God's design of male and female. So I've learned that being female is so much more than the clothes you wear and these other things. There's a responsiveness in being female to a man's initiation. And God has given him qualities that the woman needs. So God has wired the man to protect, and a woman actually has a deep need for security. And he's wired the man to provide, and women have this need to be provided for and to be taken care of and to be cherished and treasured. And so God's design was never to be at strife with one another, or sometimes we try to make the other person like us because we're more comfortable sometimes with someone that's like us. But we actually need those complementary qualities.
Yeah, I have a theory about all this, and I'll probably get some hate mail, but I believe that there's some women with more testosterone than the other women, and I know I was probably one of those because I played sports and I always liked boy stuff. I played with cars, and I like to play baseball with the boys, and so, but I still love being a girl. I love both things, and so I think sometimes though your environment can send you over to the other side, to the different direction because of hurts and pain like what you had, right? Am I wrong on that?
No, you're right. In fact, when I was 19, they tested my hormone levels, and I had higher testosterone than a man with prostate cancer. My testosterone was off the charts. But the answer was not that I needed to become a man. The answer was I needed my hormones balanced. Yes. There was a chemical problem, but it wasn't something that I was genetically wired to do. I needed my hormones balanced. And so, in fact, it was confusing in high school because I was so strong. Sometimes I was out lifting grown men at the gym sometimes. But, I needed medical help.
Yeah. I just want to touch on that because my daughter, my youngest one, has PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, and the hormone imbalance started when she was like 8, and she was already hitting through puberty faster than need be, and we sought medical help for that. And then later on, she found out that she in fact has this PCOS, and it really does, because we are a big chemistry set. It can change everything, which also can change the way we think about ourselves because of the chemistry and the chemical imbalance. So when you're making these dramatic changes to your body at such a young age, taking off your bosom, taking away your ovaries, which from a chemistry point may have been a good thing, but I don't know about that. Do you regret making those decisions at that age?
Yeah, I do, and I was a young adult. I was 25 when I started, but, now, especially now that I've found the healing that I have, at the time I thought I was happy. There were periods of time where I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I used to make fun of people that left the lifestyle. I just couldn't even imagine. I thought they're weak. They can't handle it. Why would you ever go back? Because it was better than the pain I was experiencing. Mm-hmm. But eventually it didn't fix the pain, and that kept coming up. But now, especially now that I'm getting married, and I know God has brought me this amazing man that totally accepts me the way I am, and he keeps saying, like, I don't see you as your past, and he's fine with the fact that I don't have breasts, but I regret it just from a personal standpoint because this isn't what God intended for me.
Sounds like Jesus with skin on, because Jesus doesn't see us with our past either. He makes us white as snow when we accept him, right? Amen. We were having a discussion about the transgender male athletes who are trying to compete with women. I know there's a swimmer, I think, from Dartmouth that was competing against women swimmers from the opposing schools. I just want to get your feelings about that. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? It seems like it's not balanced as far as the competition goes.
Well, I think at the very least it's unfair, and sometimes, depending on the sport, can be downright dangerous. There was one where there was an MMA fighter that cracked a girl's skull, and she said she'd been in fights all her life. She said she had never been hit that hard by far. She said there was such a physical difference. And also, I've been studying on the difference between men and women, and scientists have found over 6,500 biological differences between men and women. And that's only what scientists know. That doesn't cover what God knows that they don't. So they have larger hearts, they have a larger lung capacity, they have, their muscles are actually different and larger. Their muscles are physically larger. So even they have broader shoulders. So even if they take hormones that may reduce their testosterone a little bit, it doesn't change the thousands of other ways they have advantages. They're literally much more, they're going to be stronger. Now, in some hand grip strength, they said, for example, is one of the biggest differences. The bottom 10% or the top 10% of females can only beat the bottom 10% of men. There's such a stark contrast. So you think about something like weightlifting, just that grip strength alone is going to give them a huge advantage.
Yeah.
And, I think what they're doing sometimes, they're highlighting some people that are probably not all that good at their sport, and they're saying, see, a woman can beat him. But for the most part, they are absolutely dominating the sports.
Yeah, I think it's really destroying it for women, to have the opportunity, the scholarships, the efforts, the so on and so forth. My whole dissertation, becoming Dr. Lynnette, was about gender differences. And it was actually for in the classroom, because just fine motor skills versus gross motor skills, boys, girls, how we learn with focus and attention, in the ways that we describe things, nouns versus verbs. It is so different from not only physiological, but psychological and emotional. To try to make our classrooms gender neutral is what's killing our boys and our girls.
Right. But I'm sure in all the research you found out that girls are smarter, right? No,
Indeed.
They think very differently.
Yes, they do.
And men actually have a larger brain capacity, but women are much more connected, and we use our brain, and everything's related, and we actually do have a larger white matter, which is the part of the brain that connects the two hemispheres. And so it makes sense. We're so relational. Everything's connected. Men are able to compartmentalize, and they're able to focus better.
I did a Bible study once that was called "Men Are Like Waffles and Women Are Like Spaghetti."
Oh,
because
so true.
we can connect.
Well, being dyslexic, I had to learn that the hemispheres of the brain, like you were talking about, that white matter, the reason why boys are more diagnosed with learning disabilities is because they don't have the white matter, so they can't jump hemispheres to compensate, where girls are underdiagnosed because we do. So for example, I was dyslexic my entire life and was not diagnosed until I was in my 20s. Why? Because I learned to compensate. And so I just thought I was a slow or inept reader, where boys, if they can't compensate, then they start doing stuff that gets their teacher's attention, and next thing you know, there's got to be something wrong, let's get them tested. So they're tested. Girls will fidget. They'll do little things if they're not being able to pay attention, and so they go undiagnosed. So it's amazing.
It is interesting, the differences between the two.
Yeah.
We got a little time. Why don't you tell us about your book?
Okay, so my book is called Transgender to Transformed, and it chronicles my story. And then also in the back, there's a chapter where I really speak to both those that struggle and to parents. And my website is the same as the book title, so it's just transgender2transformed.com, and you can order it there or on Amazon, either one.
Wow.
Give us a little highlight about you being featured in this amazing piece of work here.
In His Image is one of the most beautifully done documentaries. I didn't have anything to do with the production, but they filmed my story along with 3 others. And then there's all kinds of commentators that they have that are just giving a really biblically solid defense, but in a very loving and compassionate way. This film just speaks to anybody that is struggling, but also anybody that maybe is just not real comfortable in their male or female design. There are so many people that this is encouraged, and yes, God made me this way. But also how to defend this in a loving and compassionate way. And it's just, the film is also just beautifully done.
Wow. Love it.
I was just thinking, I just love your fiance because he said that he doesn't even think about your past, and it reminds me of Jesus, when we come to him, he does not even remember, what we did in the past. So kudos to him.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good job. So thank you again, Laura, for being here with us and sharing all that you have gone through in this amazing Transgender to Transformed. I mean, you are transforming all of our audience to hear about this message and hopefully helping others. So if you want to know more about Laura, of course, you can purchase her book, and you can find her at the website transgenderedtotransformed.com.
And thank you again, Laura. We love women and we want to help women, and that's what we do here at Pearls of Promise Ministries. We're the producers of Pop Talk. You can email us if you have comments about this show, info@pearlsofpromiseministries.com. We're on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter at Pop Talk Media. Also on Instagram at Pop_Ministries. And you can find all of our television shows on our YouTube channel. Just go to Pearls of Promise Ministries.
And thanks to our 9 networks, including Life Network for Women, Overcomers TV, Faith Unveiled Network, the Bloom Network, CTN Tallahassee, and CTF TV.
It's growing. And we want to thank Grace Point Media, who did all the production on today's show. For all of your media needs, go to gracepoint.media. Well, that is Pop Talk for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. We're just ordinary girls.
Who God's turning into pearls.
Have a wonderful week.